Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I believe it's been about a month or so since I made any sort of long form content for you guys. Tomorrow, when I'm filming this, it will be 11 years since I ran away from home. 11! Last year I was in shock when we hit a decade. I say we because I've shared this journey with you all for, I think, about 5 years now, but I just can't believe that it's 11 years. It feels honestly like yesterday and yet so far away all at the same time. And seeing as I get so many questions on this topic, I felt it only fitting to make a video about 3 particular things on this topic to share with you all. We're back to some tea with me, so I hope you have your cup of tea in hand to share with me while I focus on 3 key topics for today. First up, I'm going to talk about why everything happened. Second, how it all even happened. And third, what? Basically, what came as a result. So why, how, and what? So why did I run away from home? Chances are, because you're watching this, you've probably seen other content that I've shared over the years where I've talked about this before. So without going into too much detail, I will sum it up in a nutshell for anyone that is new here. If you are new, hi, welcome. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you to anyone watching in general anyway. But when I was 22 years old, I ran away from home. And now I know a lot of people hear the number 22, and I've often received comments and they say something along the lines, read something along the lines of, you can't run away at 22, that's just moving out. When you consider the context of the scenario, especially the cultural influences on the scenario, age is irrelevant. I was being abused as a child. I was being abused from as early as I can remember, not just by my mother, but also by her boyfriend. And combining that with a very strict cultural influence, my mother is of a Middle Eastern background. And whilst I have so often commented that a strict parent doesn't necessarily equate to an abusive parent, so I just want to reiterate that. Unfortunately, my mother used those sorts of elements of our culture as an excuse to then violate essentially my childhood, to justify why she was abusing me. So yes, you can be 22 and run away from home. I come from a culture where unless you are married, you know the saying, you're either going to leave this house married or dead. I definitely come from that kind of world. And so growing up, the idea of me just moving out because I was unhappy, that didn't exist. That wasn't even a notion. So I know people sit here and watch these videos or listen to my speeches or anything where I've spoken about this topic and kind of look at me and think you could have just left. I know physically people see it that way. And I know potentially upon reflection, I probably could have very much just said, I'm going. I probably would have had my backside beaten, but it was mentally not an option whatsoever. Now that I've addressed that issue, I was 22, and for the majority of my life, I was being abused by both my, let's just say, caregivers, the 2 people that I lived with. I feel like the title parent isn't very deserving in this scenario, and so I don't really like to use it. I already need another sip of tea, to be honest. All right. For as long as I can remember, I'm trying to do this in a summary here, but we all know I love to... My mother has always been a very physically abusive, emotionally, verbally abusive woman. I cannot remember a time upon reflection where my mother wasn't violent or aggressive in some manner, especially, not just physically, but especially when it came to her choice of language. She was a very negative and aggressively spoken woman. I say was, and it sounds like I'm talking as if she has passed. That's not the case. It's just was because it's in my past, just to clarify if anyone questions that. And there are honestly too many scenarios to reference, even if I try to put them into, categories to explain. I have talked about this in depth before, and I don't want to make this another one of those videos where I start repeating myself. So there's that summary. And then moving on now also to my stepdad, he was abusive as well, but sexually. To be fair, I probably should have put a trigger warning at the start of this, but essentially he was sexually abusive for years. And even after I addressed the issue with my mother, it persisted in some ways and then manifested itself into other things. I honestly don't know if I summarized any of this properly or if I've just jabbered on for really a long time. But in short, now that I've laid all that out, My mother was abusive, her boyfriend was abusive. I lived with them for most of my life. My parents were together when I was first born, but they separated almost soon after. And I don't remember a time in my life where her boyfriend, after my dad, that's who she ended up with after my dad, where he wasn't around. So in short, I keep repeating myself, but in short, that was the nature of the first 22 years of my life. And so as you can imagine, when you're being reared in an environment where you're being violated, where you're not being treated as a child deserves, something has to happen. Something has to give, where you get to a point where you have to break away from that. You need some sort of change that then equates to some sort of healing, because it's not an environment that anyone could survive in. Hence why I ran away from home. And I hope that answers that first question. I feel like I definitely just went on a bit of a tangent here and there, which anyone who has been here for a while knows I am very susceptible to that. But yeah, I ran away from home because life was horrendous. My mum beat me up regularly. There were a lot of things that resulted in, even if upon reflection I didn't deserve it, I could probably, try and argue for her sake that there were certain things that I did that, yeah, perhaps I deserved a hiding, as, my family will say in Ireland, some form of punishment, physical punishment. But, and I'm trying not to be biased here and look at it from the lens of not supporting physical punishment to a child. But if you were to look at it from the perspective where you accept that, maybe there were the odd scenario here and there, like no one is perfect, but it was so seldom when I look back in hindsight that I cannot believe the amount of times that I actually did end up having to be, as my mother would have termed it, in need of physical discipline. Not that it was that anyway, that's just what it was being called. It was essentially being beaten up. And they were not just those sorts of physical punishments. Aside from being beaten, my mother would often expect me to do things as a punishment. So for example, hold myself in a certain position. I know how this may sound, but hold myself in certain positions. So for example, she would call it going on your knees. And I'd have to kneel on floorboards for the longest I ever recall doing it was for 4 hours, which I am not going to start crying. This video was not meant to make me crying. Gosh, and I felt confident this morning when I said I wanted to do this video that I was not going to cry. I was in such a good mental headspace. Anyway, for 4 hours, sorry guys, where I would have to be on my knees, and I would often have to put my hands up in the air, dead straight. If my elbows bent or anything, I would get whacked. And it might sound silly to the odd person, but there was a lot of name calling. So for example, when I was young, I used to get called certain things that I didn't like, and I was about 8 years old and I didn't know how to express myself properly. And I remember writing a letter, and I left it in the kitchen for my mother to find when I went to school, in the hopes that she would read it when she got back after dropping me off and understand where I was coming from, and be, moved at the fact that I felt I even needed to do that, to write a letter, and that there would be some healing to come from that, and we would move on and it would never happen again. I got in trouble for that, for making her feel like a bad mother, because I had to write a letter to ask her to stop doing something. And I was just painted as the image of me was painted as the child who just didn't have thick skin, couldn't handle, reality and the real world. And she was just, toughening me up for that. I'm trying not to be too vague, especially for anyone that's new here, but you get the idea. Why did I run away from home in the end? I'm just trying to make sure I answer this question and not result, when I look back at the editing, not just have a whole bunch of tangents. Basically, I didn't really have a mum. I had an abuser, and she brought into the house someone who was also an abuser, and he was horrible in other ways. I spent years, especially in my early teens, waking up with him every single morning, and it was horrendous. And oh my god, I don't know why it took me about 2 years to tell my mum. I can't actually explain properly why I didn't just go to her straight away. I don't have an answer. And if there's anything that my psychologist really healed me with when I was getting regular therapy, it is the fact that I just have to tell myself, remind myself that that's not my responsibility. When you're the child, you're the child. And in that scenario, it's not my job to understand and know better. I just was in a situation where the best I can explain and reason with myself is I knew something was wrong. And if I went and explained that to my mother, or rather not explained that, if I went and told my mother, I knew that because something was wrong, that things would just get worse. And I guess I felt like I just had to put up with it. And I actually, in fairness, didn't really know what was wrong. I know that sounds silly, but I was about 11, 12 years old when the sexual nature of the abuse started. And so as a consequence, it was very confusing. I didn't grow up, in a very sexualized environment. I wasn't very conscious of the nature of these acts. I also didn't grow up with my father regularly in my life, so I didn't know what to expect from my own father. This is not how this video was meant to go. Anyway, so I kept quiet for a couple years because I just thought that was going to make things easier. And it wasn't until one morning when I was on my way to school and I'd gotten really upset because I was so uncomfortable. And I didn't know how to express myself in any other way other than to say to him, he was driving me to school, he would ask me every day if I liked it. And this one particular morning when we were going to school, my siblings and I, he asked me that bloody question. And I remember at that point my anger being so pent up and I didn't know how else to express it. And all I said to him was, you know what you're doing is wrong because you're treating me like your wife and I'm not your wife, and that's something that you shouldn't be doing. And I remember thinking the analogy of wife to child should make it clear, and it didn't stop for ages after. It never stopped until I finally told my mum, to whom, by the way, blamed me. Shocker. I guess I should have seen that coming, and I did not. I definitely did not see that coming. I think when I eventually, which there is a whole backstory to it, but when I eventually built up the courage to tell her, I somehow convinced myself that she loved me enough that she would leave him, because why would you allow someone like that to be in your child's life? That didn't happen. I got kicked out of the house, but that's a story for another day. He's in the same house. There's I'm not really sure how you call it overseas. In Australia, like back houses, we call them granny flats, and we had a little granny flat at the back of the house where his mother lived. And I got kicked out of my own room and of the main house, and I was told that because of the scenario, and it was my fault for things that I was wearing and wearing. Anyway, and everyone wonders why I don't like wearing shorts now as a bloody adult. But anyway, I got kicked out and sent back to live with his mum because I couldn't be trusted in the main house. But anyway, this isn't how the first part of these 3 questions was supposed to go. And Lord knows how long this video already is. I wasn't meant to have it this long, but that's why I ran away from home. All right, definitely need another bit of my tea, thank you. Oh, tea really is such a comfort for me. All right, moving on. Okay, part 2. Question 2, rather. How did I run away from home? Again, I've also touched on this here and there. Everything I've touched on, I suppose, but it's been in bits and pieces here and there in different videos, be it long form, short form, and it's never really been amalgamated into one video like this. So I'm trying not to repeat myself, but I'm also trying to consolidate everything into one video for you all. Again, there is of course always more of a backstory and more context to everything that I'm going to say. Nothing just happens out of nowhere. But ironically, actually, somewhat of this did really just happen suddenly. But of course, there was a build up to all of this. But on the 22nd of July, which is for me when I'm filming this, and hopefully I'll be posting this tomorrow, but when I'm filming this, it is tomorrow 11 years ago. On the 22nd of July, actually, no, sorry. That's when I ran away from home, but I want to give you more information. On the 21st of July, which is 11 years ago today, 11 years ago today, I went to university and broke down because I was not coping. I was getting only a few hours of sleep a night because aside from my life being horrendous, my mum was also doing certain things which I've never spoken about, and I don't think excuse me, I've got the hiccups. I don't think I ever will. I wasn't getting a lot of sleep, and I was having to hide things for my mother, and I was trying to do so much as what I call myself, you know, my sibling's second mother. I was also trying to manage a double degree at university, and I was essentially the cook and the cleaner at home. Everything was out of control. We had 4 dogs that were also all my responsibility. My 3 siblings were essentially my responsibility. I am the one that had to do all their getting ready for them every single morning for school, and when they came home, I'm the one that had to clean up after them after dinner and do their homework with them and all that sort of stuff. Never mind the fact that I was doing that from high school through into university, and now at this point, this particular day, the 21st of July, I am trying to manage a double degree, and I had an assessment task due the next day, which I was nowhere near ready for. And I basically broke down with one of my friends who had enough. Now, in fairness, they had enough of me crying and coming to them venting and doing nothing about it. Now, they didn't understand fully the circumstances. They didn't know how trapped I felt and how incapable I felt of doing anything. So I don't mean to paint this person in a bad light, but they had enough. I then also called another friend. This person that I'm about to speak about was actually overseas. I've also touched on this topic a little bit, but essentially I had a friend that I met online. And now I was seldom allowed to be online. I wasn't allowed to have social media at the time. I did have a Bieber account secretively that my mother didn't know about, but I could only use it when I created it in high school and then at university. And so I met a friend online. Essentially, this is what I'm getting at. I met a friend online, and I wasn't allowed to talk to them a whole lot. And eventually I did tell my mum about him. But I had this friend, and he basically said to me, it's either me or you. And now upon reflection, this person didn't handle this scenario very well, but he was also young. He came from a very, in comparison to me, loving family, didn't understand the circumstances, and he just couldn't handle what he was hearing. Sometimes I'd have headphones in and he'd hear what was happening around the house. And accompanied with how much I would cry to him, he just couldn't handle it anymore. And essentially, if you like, forced me verbally to run away from home. It was his idea. It was actually never my idea. He is the one who said to me, you have a dad out there somewhere, you need to go. So again, to summarize, he found my father's number. I somehow summoned the courage to call him, which let me tell you, when I hadn't, at that point, it'd been about 6 years, roughly speaking, that I hadn't spoken to my dad. I was so nervous. I was ridiculously nervous. So I rang my dad. And to cut another long story short, everything is a long story, especially in this kind of a subject. My father, the beautiful, beautiful father that he is, came to see me at uni. He was there within an hour because he lived far away. We sat down, we had a chat, we discussed everything. I was absolutely traumatized. And to make matters worse, my dad said to me, I love you and you are always more than welcome to come with me. But there's one problem. You have to go back home. You haven't a clue. I have no words how to express the feeling of being told when I'm just emotionally starting to think that I can get out. And also, I'm doing something that, by the way, I know I'm going to get in trouble for. I know I'm going to, again, be abused for if my mother were to find out what I was doing. And so I am being told by my father that I need to go back home one more time because my birth certificate, my passport, it's expired, but it's a means of identification, my proof that I finished high school, my, what else was there? A few bits and bobs that my dad just deemed necessary, my tax file number, things like that. And even upon reflection, I went home and actually I looked around my room that I shared with my siblings, and I realized there were things like a bracelet that my sister had made for me, you know, a drawing from my siblings, and all sorts of things that at that moment I went, you know what, tomorrow morning I'm going to pack in my bag and take with me, that I am now grateful he got me to go home that day before I then left the next day, because I actually got to take things with me that I would have regretted if I didn't. I even took some jewelry with me. I'm very, very sentimental. So jewelry that I had that I know I was wearing when I was with my siblings, I took photos with my siblings and a video with my siblings before I left as a little bit of a goodbye, as kind of a means of closure, if you like, for me. I think if I never had that opportunity to say my goodbyes, even though they didn't know it was goodbyes at the time, although the way I said goodbye to my brother, he probably did start to be suspicious a little bit, but they didn't know at the time, but I did. I made my mom her last cup of tea in the morning, went in, I said goodbye. All of that was probably very helpful in a way that I didn't know at the time. So although I was terrified, I'm really grateful that my dad got me to do that. Anyway, the next day, I left. I went to university early in the morning. I packed my bag. I went to catch the bus because I was at the time living about an hour and a half one way from my university. Via public transport, it was nearly 3 hours. So I left very early that morning, which I'm so happy about because I could not sleep that night and I just needed to get out. So I got out, I called my dad. I went to university that day. I did the assessment task that was due that day. I don't know how I did it. And then my dad, as I've often talked about this part of the story, my dad showed up on his motorbike at university, strapped all the belongings, not that I had much with me, I had one backpack, strapped all the belongings that I had onto the back of his bike, and off we went over the Sydney Harbour Bridge just to make the whole experience poetic. And I went home to my Irish family, to my grandparents that took me in, and the rest is history. My dad is my saving grace here. My dad is my hero, the one who rescued me. My grandparents are my home, my peace, my everything. That after everything I've been through with them over these last 11 years, my grandparents are my best friends. My dad is my hero, and it's just, I hope I've answered how I ran away, but it's been such a awfully painful at times, but wonderful, wonderful journey. I say awfully painful just to establish for anybody who might be in a similar situation or has been in a similar situation, running away from home isn't the be all and end all. Leaving trauma and leaving pain and all of that isn't something you can fully ever escape. Whilst I did escape physically, I didn't escape mentally. The healing that ended up coming as a consequence that I had no idea about. I ended up being diagnosed soon after with PTSD, which, if you don't know, is post-traumatic stress disorder. I was having nightmares every single night. I would wake up screaming. My grandfather would have to come in and calm me down. And it was just a whirlwind of an experience that even until now, I'm learning how to heal from. And I don't think it's ever, rather I know that PTSD is something that will never go away. It's just something that you will learn to live with. And I think I am getting better at that. I am. I definitely think that over the last 11 years, whilst some years have been more trying than others, especially the years where I opened myself up to healing and didn't just try and shut off from my own emotions and try and distract myself all the time by keeping busy, but rather actually sat in my feelings and learned to understand them. But yeah, I don't know if I finished any sentence properly just then, but it's been a journey. That's how it happened, thanks to my wonderful family. And I fully recognize that, given the scenario that I was in, how blessed I am to have had another family to go to. If that had been, God forbid, both my parents that were doing that to me, there's no way I would have had the options that I had or have still till this day. I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have had to have found a friend that was lovely enough, and they came with a family that were beautiful enough to be able to support me and help me. That wasn't the case. I don't know fully what I would have done. I'd like to, hypothesize, but I'm not sure. Whew. Oh my gosh, this is quite a mentally draining video to make, and I fully underestimated this. All right, number 3. What happened as a result? What is now the story, if you like? What came as a consequence of running away from home? If you asked me this question every single year on the anniversary since I ran away from home, my answer would be different. But seeing as this is in honor of the 11th year since I ran away, I'm going to tell you from just this year's perspective. Of course, previously, as I've just touched on, I've gone and got therapy. I didn't know I was going to have to do that, but I have invested a lot of money in healing. And let me tell you, it is so, so necessary. But not just therapy with a professional. Therapy also within yourself. Understanding who you even are, figuring yourself out. What is it that you like? Who are you without the influence and the blanket of a hue that is crowding you in the influence from those abusers? Who are you outside of that world? Who are you when you make your own choices, when you breathe your own air, when you are independent? And there are so many other things above. I often get people commenting on how many photos I have in my room, but above is a myriad of photos of my trips that I have done overseas, which I have to say, going overseas, especially the time that I went for 6 months and lived with my father overseas working in London, was one of the most healing aspects of my healing journey. Just being alone on the other side of the world with the man that I lost time with my father, learning how to bond with him, and going to the place that, by the way, my original plan at one stage, which I don't know how it would have worked. I never actually tried to put it into action. Although my mum said she was going to help me, I don't believe her, but that's a story for another day. My original plan of action was finish, which I was still about half a year out, finish my teaching degree and go work overseas. I was going to hopefully get a job in London and work overseas, and she would have thought that I was only going for 3 months, but I was secretly never going to come back. Secretly, never going to, why am I wording it like that? Never going to come back. That was my plan at one stage, a very ill thought out plan, but my plan nonetheless. So being there with my father, knowing that at one stage that was my plan, and just achieving a dream of mine, a goal, whilst making up for lost time with him, was so therapeutic. But sorry, I am digressing again. I meant to be focusing on this year. What am I doing now as a consequence to keep pushing forward and just continue this ever-long healing journey? With the foundations of the previous decade of healing, I definitely have what I'm going to say is a routined life. Everyone is different. I am definitely someone who needs routine to essentially survive. I need an itemized daily routine to know what I'm doing every hour from the moment I wake up to the moment that I'm going to sleep. This has helped me have order and structure in my life. Now, the weekend, just to preface, the weekend is different. The weekend, although I still have a little bit of a routine at the weekend, i.e. I still like to go for a morning walk, a morning prayer, etc. The weekend is very free. But Monday to Friday, every hour, I know what I'm doing. And that structure allows me to feel secure and driven. And in some way, I feel productive in a manner that I can't without it. And now I know a lot of people that wouldn't work for them and they need a little bit more freedom. And that I don't feel like I don't have freedom, by the way, but this works for me. I wake up every morning at around 7 o'clock, sometimes 6:30, sometimes 7:30. It depends on what time I went to bed the night before. I love getting up at 6:30. And for a long time, that's what I was doing. But I now finish work even later, than I ever used to. I have more students, thankfully. And so as a consequence, sometimes I set my alarm for 7 or even 7:30. When I get up, I immediately go upstairs. I make a cup of tea. Well, actually, no, if you want me to give you even more detail, I brush my teeth, wash my face, brush my hair back into a bun, ready for the morning routine. But then I go up and I have a cup of tea with my grandparents. I check my work emails. And when that's done, I come downstairs. I sit, which anyone who's watched my vlogs before will know I've done. I sit in my room and I pray. Now, if for anyone where that wouldn't work for them, you don't have to pray. If you want to try any, thing that I'm mentioning, maybe you think it might help you for whatever the reason, you don't have to pray. You can meditate, whatever works for you. And then I know immediately after that, I go into the garden, I clean and water my garden, head straight outside for an hour. I do an hour walk, get my cardio in. I come inside for 20 minutes. I do strength training, weights. I never used to do that. That's a new addition to my routine as a consequence of PCOS, the PCOS diagnosis. I've spoken about that in a previous video if you want to know. And then when I'm finished my workout, I go upstairs. I have my brunch, if you like, at this point. I don't eat first thing in the morning. I intermittent fast in the morning. And I go up, I have my brunch. I come downstairs. Now, sometimes I swap this I will do that first. I come downstairs and have my shower. If I want, I'll shower first and then eat. Sometimes I'm a little bit, adventurous and I swap my routine around. I'm not adventurous in that respect. I come down, I shower, I get dressed, ready for work, and then I'm off for the day. In between doing my strength training, I might make the bed. When I'm resting between a set, I might sit down and read a page or two out of one of my books, whatever book I'm reading at that point. I might go hang up the clothes, whatnot, just in case, you're wondering about any missing details, but that's what happens there. And once I'm ready, I head off into my office and I start lesson planning my students' work for the day. And then I might, with it, whatever time I have left before I start, I'll, practice piano. I'll keep doing other little things that I have, for example, goals like learning Irish. I'm really trying at the moment to learn a little bit of Irish here and there. Things like that. Then I'll be at work until late evening. I sometimes won't be heading back upstairs until about 9 o'clock at night. And I will be upstairs and I will have a very late, yes, but a late dinner with my grandparents, and then come down, have another shower, because usually after work I will go on the treadmill and go for another 30-minute walk. Walking is one of the only things that makes me feel good when I'm exercising. And when I say walking, I mean speed walking, but it's the only type of exercise that I ever really commit to. If there's any piece of advice I will give to anyone when they want to do a routine, start with small achievable goals and things that you can realistically stick at because you enjoy them. Now, nobody, at least to my knowledge, wants to get sweaty and work out really hard. But for some reason on the treadmill, I love it. I love when I start, sweating and getting a good workout on the treadmill, especially because I can put my book or a video on the treadmill and watch or read something at the same time. I am definitely someone who doesn't like to do one thing only, especially if it's just walking. I want to do something else. Anyway, so in a nutshell, that's what I do as a consequence of life being what it is, in order to feel like I'm constantly working on myself, in order to feel like I'm staying productive and maintaining my goals and working towards the future that I'm trying to achieve. Anyway, I foolishly thought that this video was only going to be about 10-15 minutes when I first sat down here. But now the recording is anywhere from about 40 to 50 minutes. So I'm hoping I'll be able to edit this down a little bit. But for now, I'm going to finish my cold cup of tea and then I have work, which is a part of the routine that I was mentioning to you all today. I just happened to slot in some time to do some filming, which on certain days, because there are a few things in my routine that is a bit different to each routined day, I will allocate time for things like this, filming, editing content, etc., because this is a second job for me. So anyway, I hope you have somewhat enjoyed. I know this has been a little bit more mellow than I had intended, but enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, as always, I will do my best to reply to all your comments below. Thank you so much for watching. To my regular long form viewers, the ones that are always watching my vlogs when I used to be posting them twice a week, I did say I would be back. I am back, and I am so sorry that I haven't been posting more long form content or much content in general. It has been such a busy year. There are so many things happening behind the scenes, but thank you. I am so happy to be back myself, and I look forward to the next video, which hopefully won't be a whole month away. Hopefully I'll be posting another one again soon. As always, thank you for watching. Much love and God bless, and I will see you all in my next video. Mwah.